The Zephyrian Empire ruled over half the galaxy with iron fists and plasma cannons. Their history books told a simple story about Earth and humanity. 847 cycles ago, Earth's sun went crazy and started dying. The humans tried to escape, but most of them failed. The lucky few who got away scattered across distant star systems like seeds in the wind. After a few generations, they mixed with other alien races and disappeared completely. Humanity was done. Finished. Just another dead civilization that couldn't handle the dangers of space. Commander Veltar had served the Empire for 30 years. He flew patrol missions in the quiet zones where nothing interesting ever happened. The Empire gave these boring jobs to older officers who were too slow for real combat, but too experienced to retire. Veltar didn't mind. He liked the peace and quiet of empty space. But on this particular day, his sensors started beeping like crazy. Veltar was flying near the old Sol system, the place where Earth used to be. According to every map and database, this area should be completely empty except for a dead star and some floating rocks. Instead, his ship's computers were showing him something impossible. There was debris everywhere, but not the random junk you'd expect from a destroyed planet. This debris was arranged in neat patterns. Huge chunks of metal and crystal formed perfect geometric shapes stretching for thousands of kilometers. Some pieces were the size of small moons. Others looked like giant building blocks floating in formation. Even stranger were the energy readings. Dead space shouldn't have any energy signatures at all, but Veltar's instruments detected power sources hidden throughout the debris field. The energy pulses came in regular patterns, like a heartbeat or breathing. Whatever was generating this power was definitely artificial, but it didn't match any technology in the Empire's databases. Veltar sent his report up the chain of command and figured that would be the end of it. Imperial bureaucrats would file his discovery under weird space stuff and forget about it. He was wrong. 3 sectors away, Captain An was having her own strange day. She commanded a listening post on the edge of Imperial space, where her job was to monitor communications from rebel groups and enemy nations. Most days she intercepted angry messages from pirates or boring trade negotiations between merchant fleets. But lately, her equipment kept picking up signals that made no sense. They only lasted for a few microseconds before disappearing completely. The encryption was so advanced that Imperial code breakers couldn't even figure out what language it was, let alone what the messages actually said. At first, An thought her equipment was broken. Space was full of random electromagnetic noise that could confuse sensitive instruments. But these signals were different. They appeared at the same time across 17 different sectors, always in the same geometric patterns. If these were random equipment failures, they wouldn't be so perfectly coordinated. An started plotting the signal sources on a 3-dimensional map of local space. What she saw made her stomach drop. The transmission points formed perfect triangles, squares, and other mathematical shapes. The only way to achieve this kind of precision was if the transmitters were on ships flying in tight formation, maintaining exact distances from each other. But there were no ships on any Imperial sensors. Whatever was sending these messages was completely invisible to every detection system the Empire had ever built. Captain An shared her findings with other listening post commanders. To her surprise, they had all been detecting similar signals, but hadn't reported them because they seemed impossible to explain. Together, they realized they were tracking what appeared to be a massive fleet of invisible ships, moving through Imperial space in perfect formation. The signals grew stronger and more frequent over the following weeks. Sometimes they appeared near busy trade routes. Other times they showed up in empty systems where no one was supposed to be. The pattern suggested that whoever was sending these messages was watching the Empire very carefully, studying their movements and activities. Imperial intelligence tried to dismiss the reports as equipment malfunctions or natural phenomena. But experienced officers like Veltar and An knew the difference between broken sensors and genuine mysteries. Something was out there in the darkness between the stars. Something that had technology far beyond what the Empire understood. And whatever it was, it had been watching them for a very long time. The silent years of humanity's supposed extinction were about to come to a very loud end. Dr. Cora spent most of her time digging through old Imperial archives that nobody else wanted to read. As the Empire's lead researcher on dead civilizations, she studied species that had vanished long before most people were born. It was lonely work, but Cora loved solving historical puzzles that had been forgotten for centuries. The reports about strange signals near the old Sol system got her curious. She decided to look up humanity's official destruction records and compare them to other extinct species. What she found made her hands shake as she typed her notes. The Valtari had been a peaceful trading civilization that controlled 12-star systems. According to Imperial records, their home star went supernova without warning. The survivors scattered across the galaxy as refugees, and within 2 generations they had disappeared completely. The Empire moved into their empty territories 50 years later, claiming the systems were unclaimed space. The Nethic were master engineers who built incredible space stations. Their records showed a plague that wiped out 90% of their population. The survivors fled in all directions, abandoning their amazing technology. The Empire discovered their empty stations a century later and reverse-engineered their innovations. The Corvan were explorers who mapped the dangerous regions beyond Imperial space. A series of asteroid impacts destroyed their homeworld and 3 colony planets within the same decade. Pure bad luck, according to the official reports. The few survivors joined other alien communities and lost their cultural identity. The Empire claimed their star charts and exploration data as abandoned property. Cora found 17 different civilizations with almost identical stories. First came a catastrophic disaster that looked natural, but happened at exactly the worst possible time. Then came desperate evacuation efforts that only saved a small percentage of the population. The survivors always scattered widely instead of staying together, which meant they lost their political power and cultural unity. Within a few generations, they disappeared into the larger galactic population. Every single time, the Empire moved into their former territories after waiting just long enough for the legal claiming period to expire. Every single time, the Empire benefited enormously from the abandoned technology, resources, and strategic locations. The pattern was too perfect to be coincidence. Cora started digging deeper into the technical details of these disasters. What she found made her realize she was uncovering the Empire's darkest secret. Earth's sun hadn't died naturally. Someone had planted devices deep in the star's core that accelerated nuclear fusion in specific areas. The process was designed to look like natural stellar instability, but the mathematical models didn't quite match what should have happened. A natural solar collapse would have given humanity decades of warning and time for organized evacuation. Instead, the crisis seemed to explode overnight, forcing desperate and chaotic refugee flights. But here was the strangest part. Despite the apparent desperation, humanity's evacuation efforts were incredibly well coordinated. Their refugee ships left in perfect geometric formations, taking routes that scattered them across 17 different sectors in patterns that looked random but were actually mathematically precise. It was as if they were following a carefully planned strategy rather than fleeing in panic. The ghost signals that Captain An had been tracking were getting stronger and more complex. Instead of brief bursts, they now came in long, coordinated waves that swept across multiple sectors simultaneously. The transmission patterns were so sophisticated that they had to be coming from a fleet of ships working together with military precision. Imperial High Command finally decided to investigate these mysterious deep space structures that the listening posts kept detecting. They sent 5 of their best scout ships to different locations where the signals seemed strongest. Each ship carried advanced sensors and experienced crews who had explored dangerous regions of space for decades. Ship number 1, the Swift Current, sent back excited reports about finding massive artificial structures in the void between star systems. The constructs were enormous, some larger than small planets, but they used building techniques and energy sources that Imperial scientists couldn't identify. Then, the transmissions stopped. Ship number 2, the Deep Explorer, reported, discovering what looked like a hidden base built inside a hollow asteroid. The base showed signs of recent activity but no life forms on sensors. The crew prepared to investigate further, then went silent mid-transmission. Ship number 3, the Star Hunter, never reported anything at all. One day it was there, the next day it had vanished completely without even a distress signal. Ships 4 and 5, the Night Watcher and the Void Seeker, managed to return to Imperial space, but their crews were shaken by what they had seen. They described artificial structures that seemed to shift and change when nobody was looking directly at them. Technology that worked according to physical laws that Imperial science didn't understand. And everywhere, the sense that they were being watched by intelligences far more advanced than anything the Empire had ever encountered. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Humanity hadn't died 8 centuries ago. They had disappeared, on purpose, and they had been busy ever since. The Imperial Observatory on Kepler Station had been watching empty space around the Sol system for over 800 years. Every night, the same automated telescopes scanned the area where Earth used to be, recording nothing but a dead star and scattered cosmic dust. The observations were so routine that most astronomers ignored the data completely. That's why nobody noticed the change at first. The overnight shift operator, a bored technician named Taeki, was drinking his 3rd cup of coffee when the computer started flashing warning messages. According to the sensors, something massive had appeared around the Sol system between the evening and morning scans. Taeki rubbed his eyes and checked the equipment. Everything seemed to be working normally. He ran the scans again, thinking there must be some kind of software glitch. But the results were the same. Where empty space had existed for centuries, there was now an enormous ring structure orbiting the location where Earth used to be. The ring was impossibly huge, larger than most planetary orbits. But what made Taeki's blood run cold were the geometric patterns covering its surface. He pulled up archived files from the Imperial database on human architecture and art. The patterns were identical to decorative designs that humans had used on their buildings and spacecraft centuries ago. Within hours, every major telescope in the Empire was pointed at the Sol system. What they saw defied everything they thought they knew about physics and engineering. The ring structure wasn't just floating in space randomly. It was clearly artificial, built from materials that reflected light in ways that Imperial scientists had never seen before. Energy readings showed power sources operating on scales that made the Empire's largest reactors look like campfires. But the most shocking discovery came when the telescopes focused on the center of the ring. There, where Earth should have been completely destroyed, was a perfect sphere of unknown material. The sphere was opaque to all forms of scanning, but it was definitely artificial and exactly the right size to contain a planet. Admiral Kenta called an emergency meeting of the Imperial High Command. For the first time in the Empire's history, they were facing something that challenged their understanding of what was technologically possible. After 8 hours of heated debate, they decided to send an investigation fleet to the Sol system. Captain Yuna volunteered to lead the mission. She was one of the Empire's most experienced explorers, someone who had made first contact with dozens of alien species. If anyone could handle whatever they found at Sol, it would be her. The journey to the Sol system took 3 weeks. As Captain Yuna's fleet got closer, their sensors detected more and more impossible things. The ring structure was generating its own gravitational field, strong enough to hold the mysterious sphere in perfect position. Energy patterns showed that something was powering the entire construct, with technology that operated according to physical laws the Empire had never discovered. When they finally arrived at Sol, Captain Yuna's communications officer picked up a signal on an old Imperial frequency that hadn't been used for centuries. The message was in perfect Imperial standard, spoken with a slight accent that matched archived recordings of human speech patterns. Imperial vessels, this is Earth traffic. Control. Please maintain your current position while we prepare to receive your delegation. We've been expecting you. Captain Yuna stared at her communications panel in disbelief. Earth traffic control had been destroyed 800 years ago. There was no Earth left to have traffic control for. But the signal was definitely coming from inside the mysterious sphere. 20 minutes later, the sphere began to change. A section of its surface became transparent, revealing what lay inside. Captain Yuna and her crew watched in stunned silence as Earth appeared before them. Green and blue and very much alive. Cities covered the continents, but they looked nothing like the human settlements from historical records. These cities seemed to grow organically from the landscape itself, with buildings that curved and flowed like living things. An artificial sun hung in the center of the sphere, burning with controlled fusion reactions that Imperial scientists had only dreamed about. The light was perfect, neither too bright nor too dim, carefully tuned to support Earth's ecosystem. A small craft emerged from Earth's atmosphere and approached Captain Yuna's flagship. The ship moved without any visible propulsion system, gliding through space as smoothly as a fish swimming through water. When it docked, 3 humans came aboard the Imperial vessel, but these weren't the primitive refugees that Imperial records described. These humans moved with quiet confidence and spoke with the authority of people who knew they held all the advantages. Their clothes seemed to be alive, shifting colors and patterns in response to their emotions. Their eyes held depths of knowledge that came from centuries of technological advancement. The lead human introduced herself simply as Ambassador Jiwan. She smiled politely at Captain Yuna and said words that would echo through Imperial history forever. "Welcome to Earth, Captain. We have a lot to discuss." The moment had finally arrived. Ambassador Minho stood before the massive Imperial Council, his hands steady as he presented humanity's devastating evidence. For 8 long centuries, the Galactic Empire had been lying to everyone, including themselves. The documents he carried weren't just papers. They were proof of the most horrific crimes imaginable. 47 entire civilizations had been wiped out completely. These weren't accidents or natural disasters as the Empire claimed. Every single extinction had been carefully planned and executed by Imperial forces, the same fate they had tried to bring upon Earth just decades earlier. The evidence was overwhelming. Ancient star maps showing thriving worlds that suddenly went dark, communication logs that stopped mid-sentence. Most damning of all were the classified Imperial orders detailing exactly how to make a species disappear without leaving obvious traces. They would cause their suns to flare, redirect asteroids toward populated planets, or introduce deadly plagues that looked natural but were anything but. When Minho finished his presentation, the Great Hall fell silent. Even the Imperial senators, who thought they knew their own history, sat in stunned disbelief. Many of them had grown up believing their empire was built on peaceful expansion and willing cooperation. The truth hit them like a physical blow. But the real explosion came when this information reached the subject species across the galaxy. Within hours, every communication network was buzzing with the shocking revelations. Species that had served the Empire faithfully for generations suddenly understood what had happened to their neighbors, friends, and allies who had mysteriously vanished over the centuries. The Cathari people, whose blue-scaled ancestors had spoken of the Great Silence when nearby systems went quiet, now knew their friends hadn't just stopped communicating. They had been murdered. The crystalline Vorthak discovered that their mining colonies hadn't been destroyed by solar storms, but by Imperial weapons designed to look like natural phenomena. Rage spread faster than light itself. On 17 different sectors, rebellions erupted simultaneously. These weren't small protests or minor uprisings. These were full-scale revolutions by species that had nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. The Imperial commanders found themselves fighting a war they never expected. Their communication channels filled with desperate reports from across the galaxy. K3 warships were attacking Imperial supply lines. Vorthak crystal tech was disrupting Imperial computer systems. Even species that had seemed completely peaceful and submissive were rising up with fury that had been building for centuries. But the commanders soon realized they had an even bigger problem. Human ships were appearing everywhere, seemingly out of nowhere. These weren't the small exploration vessels the Empire remembered from their first contact with Earth. These were massive warships that looked like nothing anyone had ever seen before. The humans had been busy during their decades of apparent quiet. While the Empire thought Earth was licking its wounds and rebuilding, humanity had been constructing the largest secret fleet in galactic history. They had built shipyards in the empty spaces between stars, far from any inhabited system where they might be detected. These weren't ordinary ships built with conventional technology. Somehow, Humanity had developed methods that seemed to break the basic rules of physics. Their vessels could appear and disappear without using traditional jump drives. They could accelerate in ways that should have turned their crews into paste. Most incredibly, they seemed to know exactly what Imperial ships would do before the Imperial captains even decided to do it. Imperial Admiral Chen watched in horror as human vessels danced around his best warships like they were reading his mind. Every tactical maneuver he attempted was countered before he completed it. Every weapon he fired hit empty space where human ships had been moments before. It was like fighting an enemy that could see the future. The truth was almost as incredible as that fantasy. For centuries, human artificial intelligence systems had been studying every recorded Imperial battle, every tactical manual, every strategic decision. They had built computer models that could predict Imperial behavior with terrifying accuracy. When Imperial commanders thought they were being creative or unpredictable, they were actually following patterns that human computers had mapped out decades earlier. The war that Imperial strategists had expected to last years was over in months. Human ships didn't just defeat Imperial vessels. They captured them intact, along with all their records and crew. The rebellion species, seeing human success, fought with renewed courage. Imperial forces found themselves surrendering not just to humans, but to the very people they had oppressed for generations. The confrontation that began with Ambassador Minho's presentation ended with the complete collapse of the Galactic Empire's military power. The lies that had held their civilization together for 8 centuries crumbled in the face of truth, justice, and humanity's terrifying competence at warfare. The galaxy would never be the same again. The moment the truth came out, everything changed across the galaxy. Humanity didn't keep their devastating evidence secret. They made sure everyone knew exactly what the Empire had been doing for 8 centuries. Every communication channel, every news network, every information hub suddenly carried the same shocking message. The records were impossible to ignore or dismiss. High-definition images of thriving worlds before Imperial disasters struck. Audio recordings of Imperial commanders casually discussing which species to eliminate next. Most terrifying of all were the planning documents that showed how the Empire decided which civilizations would be useful and which should be quietly erased from existence. What made the revelations even more horrifying was discovering that every single subject species was living on borrowed time. The Empire had detailed schedules for when each world would be naturally destroyed. The Kethari homeworld was scheduled for elimination in just 50 years, once their mining expertise was no longer needed. The peaceful Vorthak had maybe a century before their crystal technology would be fully understood and they would become expendable. Even the most loyal Imperial subjects realized they weren't partners in a great galactic civilization. They were temporary workers whose execution dates had already been planned. The Empire saw every other species as either a resource to be used up or a threat to be eliminated. There was no long-term future that included anyone except humans serving the Imperial core worlds. The psychological impact was devastating. Entire civilizations that had proudly served the Empire for generations suddenly understood they had been digging their own graves. Species that had reported their neighbors for suspicious activity learned they had been helping to schedule genocides. The Empire's entire social structure collapsed as nobody could trust anything they had been told. Admiral Jisoo chose this moment of maximum chaos to deliver humanity's final ultimatum. Her message was broadcast on every frequency, translated into every known language, and transmitted to every corner of Imperial space. There was no room for misunderstanding or negotiation. The terms were simple but absolute. The Imperial government would dissolve completely, not reformed, not restructured, but entirely eliminated. Every Imperial official would face trial before a galactic tribunal made up of representatives from all the species they had oppressed. Massive reparations would be paid to every surviving civilization that had suffered under Imperial rule. Most importantly, the Empire would publicly confess to every atrocity they had committed over 8 centuries. No excuses, no justifications, no claims that they were protecting galactic peace. They would admit they had been murderers and thieves who had nearly succeeded in becoming the only intelligent species in the galaxy. The alternative was simple: continued military action by the liberated worlds, now backed by human technology, that had proven superior to anything the Empire possessed. The rebellions were already spreading faster than Imperial forces could contain them. Human ships were systematically destroying Imperial military installations across dozens of sectors. The war was already over. This was just offering the Empire a chance to surrender with some dignity intact. But perhaps the most powerful moment came in Ambassador Minho's final transmission to the Imperial Council. His words carried the weight of 8 centuries of human suffering and the quiet satisfaction of ultimate victory. "You taught us the galaxy was dangerous," he said, his voice calm but filled with unmistakable strength. "You told us that only the strongest could survive, that compassion was weakness, that cooperation was foolishness. You showed us that civilizations who trusted others ended up extinct." The Imperial senators who had survived the chaos sat in stunned silence as he continued. "So we learned your lessons perfectly. We became stronger than you ever imagined possible. We developed technology you can't understand, strategies you can't counter, and patience you can't match. You thought your attack on Earth had destroyed us, taught us our place in your galactic order." His final words would be remembered for generations. "But you only taught us how to destroy you." The Empire formally surrendered within days. What emerged from the ashes wasn't another Imperial power, but something the galaxy had never seen before, the Terran Federation, dedicated to cooperation rather than conquest. Humanity's 8th-century gambit had succeeded completely. They hadn't just saved themselves from extinction, they had rescued dozens of species from joining the Empire's long list of naturally extinct civilizations. The galaxy finally had a chance to see what intelligent species could accomplish when they worked together instead of plotting each other's destruction. The age of empire was over. The age of cooperation had begun.